Is Rollei Retro400S retro cool or retro old? I wanted to do some more film comparisons to Tri-X like I began earlier in the year. But to keep things consistent, rather than do them every now and then, I went ahead and got 49 different film stocks, everything I could get in 35mm from B&H and Freestyle. So unless they were out of stock, I got a roll of it. Now, if this part of the video seems familiar, it's because I'm using this portion of the video for all 49 of them rather than record it 49 times. So if you want to skip ahead to the H&D curves or the prints, time codes are right over here. For those of you that haven't seen this part of the video before, here's what I've done. So I wanted to use each film with the exact same shot, which is a headshot of me with a Kodak Gray Card Plus, which happens to have a red, blue, and green patch, a cyan, magenta, yellow patch, and then a dark and a neutral flesh tone. Then, with those shots taken, I bracketed every shot in third of a stop so that we can make sure we have a negative of equal shadow density to the base target film of Tri-X. Now, the reason I use Tri-X is because it's just been around for a long time and it's a very popular film. So it's a good base film to compare everything to. Then, once everything was developed, which was developed in D-76 at stock for the manufacturer's recommended time, I printed everything on Ilford using the exact same aperture, contrast settings, developer, and everything. The only thing I changed was my exposure time, and that was to make sure that I compensated for any base fog variation from one film stock to another. Other than that, everything was left the same so that we can have a comparison of just the qualities of the film. Now, there's going to be some differences in contrast, especially on the high end, and that's because the manufacturers getting their development time may not have used the same target that Kodak used for Tri-X. And that's okay. We're not looking at the overall contrast for everything. What we're really looking at is grain characteristics, tonality, how the film treats the shadows versus the highlights, that sort of thing. And we're looking at spectral sensitivity, thus the Gray Card Plus, rather than just a regular gray card. So we're going to go ahead and look at H&D curves, which if you saw one of my earlier videos on sensitometry, I like to use pen and paper and make my graphs. However, my wife was really ready to make sure I was done with this project. So she put everything into a spreadsheet for you all. So even though I don't like them, I want to show them to you thanks to her. Then we're going to go ahead and look at the prints side by side with the same print made from Tri-X. And from there, you can decide if you like the film and if you want to go and use it. So let's go ahead and take a look at the curves, and then we'll go to the prints. Again, we have Tri-X in our blue, and we have the Rollei in red. Now, we can see this really long flat line before we start building anything up in our toe. And looking at my notes, it looks like we have 8 steps of exposure before we build up any bit of density. And since this particular step wedge that I used is half a step, or rather half a stop for every step, that means we have 4 stops of exposure before anything happens. So while Rollei claims this is a 400 speed film, what I'm actually getting is a 25 speed film. So much slower than advertised. Maybe you can squeeze it up to a 32 ISO, but it is not a 400 unless you're pushing the film quite a bit. But we can see that we do have just about the same curve of toe as the Tri-X, so our tonal separation in those areas should be the same once we actually start building density up. But then we have a much steeper line, Now, part of that is the development time. So if we're pushing the film, this is what we expect. We expect the flat toe to be much, much longer, or much more to the right because it's underexposed. And then the line, the rest of the curve, much steeper because we are developing to a much higher gamma, which means we're overdeveloping. So this is a pushed film. And I don't think that if you want standard 400 speed film results that you're going to get it with this particular stock. But overall, once we do get into the straight line portion, it's fairly straight, little bit of dip up there in the upper midtones, but then we do begin to get a shouldering. Now that shouldering could be because we are overdeveloping. You would probably have to actually expose at a much lower speed and then develop at a correct contrast index or gamma to see if you actually get a shoulder. But in this case, it looks like we're starting to get a shoulder, which means our upper values are blocking up. But that's because we could be reaching the limit of what this film can get when you push by nearly 4 stops. All right, let's look at the prints and see what this actually looks like in the real world. Here we have our Rollei Retro400S and our Tri-X 400. Now, I don't know where to start with this film. First off, yes, it's a bit hot on the highlights. That is a developing, not an error. It's developed for exactly what the manufacturer said, but clearly that is too long for stock D-76. Aside from that, we are getting an extended red sensitivity and a lower cyan. We have seen this with all of Rollei films with the exception of RPX 400 and 100 and obviously the ortho film from Rollei, but it is present in all the other films we've looked at from them. So we're going to get in a little closer and we're going to take a look at how everything looks for grain and detail. Unfortunately, when we get to this portion of the face, as we have done with all the other videos, we're going to see that it is pretty much blank white, and that's because of overdevelopment. There is some detail that we can take a look at in there, but being overdeveloped and so contrasty in that portion is going to be hard to see any detail, so I want to be upfront about that. However, I think we can still glean quite a bit from the rest. So let's go ahead and zoom in and see what we see. Here, looking at the grain structure, we can see that the grain is a bit bigger than Tri-X. Sharpness seems pretty good. We can see the errant fly hairs that are sticking out in silhouette are nice and sharp. And we're getting good detail in the shaded eye, or rather the skin right underneath. Here on the shaded shoulder, we're getting good gradation from black to medium. We're getting a good smooth tonality in the background, and that is nice for accentuating the grain and showing what that looks like. And it is, I think, just a bit bigger than Tri-X. Here on the lighted shoulder, we are getting good sharpness, better sharpness than I feel we got from RPX 400 from Rollei. We are getting really good detail in the fine areas of the ribbed collar of my shirt, down the stitching on the shoulder. We're just getting a little hot on the highlights. So we're losing some texture because of the long development time. Here in the last section, yes, we're too bright on the highlights. We are getting a good sense of texture and some of the skin tones around my eyelid and so forth. The cyan color being less sensitive has darkened my eye, and the red in my skin tone is being smoothed out. It's not helped along with the extended development, but overall I think it's turning out a pretty decent performance. If you shoot the Super Pan 200 or the RPX 25, I think you're going to be satisfied with this film. It's just a lot slower than advertised. Other than that, it's pretty good. So as long as you anticipate having to overexpose a little bit, just figure out the proper development time for you. Don't necessarily go by what Rollei recommends, and I think you'll be happy. It has good grain structure, fantastic sharpness, good tonality. It'll be really pleasing on skin tones by smoothing out those reds, and it'll help darken blue skies a little bit. That's going to do it for this video. Thanks again, and we will see you next time.